asking Professor Richard Wolff to give his talk. Richard Wolff is currently a visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs of the New School. He taught economics at University of Massachusetts Amherst for a long time. Before that, and he's professor of economic emeritus there. Okay, so without further.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and for coming as early as you did. And thank you also for the previous speakers' kind welcome to the return of a consciousness of capitalism as being part of the conversation and the problem. In the interests, which reporters now regularly say, of full disclosure, I should tell you from what perspective I come. I am a Marxist. I am a happy Marxist. I am more Marxist now than I used to be. In order to contravene the notion that as you get older, you get less of it. That does happen to some, but it somehow, for reasons I can't quite figure out, did not happen to me. So I've been trying to work in and with the Marxist theoretical tradition all my adult life. For those of you that don't keep track of it, it has gone through major changes in the last 20 years. So if you haven't, you may be mistaking Marxism of 20 years ago for the kinds of new and interesting developments that have happened in that tradition in the last part. It's been a very exciting process for me to participate in. And what I'm about to tell you about distribution and its relationship to the crisis has less to do with me and more to do with what a Marxist perspective of the sort that I pursue generates. So if you find it persuasive, I'm just the messenger. And if you don't find it persuasive, it's even more important that you remember that. Okay. I am going to talk about distribution, but in ways that are perhaps different from what others might have thought to present. And that will be useful for you because you can then compare the different approaches. I'm not interested in distribution in terms of Gini coefficients and how different portions of the income distribution get what portion of the total income. That's not what I'm after. And second, I'm really less interested in the effects of the crisis on distribution than I am, as I will explain, of the effects of distribution on the crisis. Since the case I'm going to make, it is the change in the distribution that I'm going to talk about that lies at the base and the core of producing this crisis, and will also help explain why it is not a typical cyclical instability of capitalism, but is a serious, profound, deep, and long-lasting crisis of the system. So let me get to that. And the way I do it, which is consistent with the Marxian tradition, is to both use basic value categories and to look at this historically. And so bear with me, if you will. I do promise it will get to the crisis in about 5 minutes. For the first roughly 100 to 150 years of the history of the United States, the working class of this country had an extraordinary experience. Real wages rose decade over decade, roughly from 1820 to 30, granted the difficulty of statistical work in those years, up to the 1970s. It's a remarkable story. It's a story in which workers get higher real wages every decade, including the Great Depression, and therefore experience something which has probably not been experienced by any other working class in any other capitalist country ever. It helps explain some fundamental interesting things about the United States. First, the endless wave of immigrants who leave other places where this is not the case and come here, hoping and expecting to get something, which for 150 years they got. It also helps explain the self-image of the United States as a charmed, special place, the kind of country in which every politician of every stripe has to say at least 5 times a day that this is the greatest country in the history of the world. The notion of American exceptionalism has a core truth in that it did produce a rising standard of living for 150 years. When that happens, you produce in the working class a notion that every generation is going to live better than the one before, that it's reasonable to have an American dream that says you'll give a better life to your children than the one you yourself enjoyed. It makes consumption the focus of life because it's what goes up, it's what life is supposed to be about. It is the compensation, rising consumption, for the ardors, the difficulties, the pain, and the exploitation of labor on the job. You know that from your economics courses, in which, usually unquestioned, the presumption is that labor is a disutility and consumption is a utility, as if it weren't possible for labor to be a utility too, or for consumption to be a disutility, which I'm sure by now you've already noticed it often is. In any case, in the 1970s, this 150